to the Extraordinary Acts for Others podcast, brought to you by the extraordinary friends here at Freedom's Ring. We are excited to celebrate the extraordinary goodness being done right here in our extraordinary country by some truly extraordinary people. It is our sincere hope that we will excite your spirit, and after listening to today's podcast, you will excitedly go out and do your own extraordinary acts for others in your community. Are you ready? Let's get excited. Welcome and thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Extraordinary Acts for Others podcast made by Freedom's Ring. We love just spreading that positivity and celebrating the people, the businesses, and the organizations that are doing such extraordinary work serving and giving back to our communities, in our country, in our world. We really believe that it is every extraordinary acts for others that creates an even more extraordinary America, and that when we serve our fellow countrymen and women, that is what patriotism in action is all about, and we want to celebrate that each chance we get. So this week we have two very special women on as our extraordinary guests. We have Leslie O'Brien, who is a fellow military spouse. She's the owner of Classy Brad's Coffee, and you might have heard her on her podcast that she co-hosts, the Millspouse Coffee House. And with her, we have her mom, Susan Newell. They join us today because just over a year ago, Susan's daughter and Leslie's sister, Shauna, who was a Navy veteran, became part of that statistic that 22 veterans die by committing suicide. In the aftermath of the loss, Leslie and Susan came together and founded Shaunas Sweet Tea, a nonprofit with the mission to support mental health issues that affect our youth and veterans, as well as to bring comfort to family members who are experiencing loss because of suicide. But before we get to their very moving conversation, we have the 3 things to know about Freedom's Ring. And again, we're focusing all on what's coming up this summer. So we have our first ever Hard Work of Freedom tour. And this is starting on May 10th, which is Military Spouse Day. And to kick it all off, we're starting at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, volunteering there in New York City. 9/11 was such an influential day for all of us and has consequences that have affected military families for almost 2 decades now. And we really wanted to go back there and to serve as spouses to say that this has affected us and that we also want to remember and honor those lives lost that day. We also have other locations that we'll be serving. There's 20 different spots going from New York and West Point to Ohio to Arizona to California to Virginia and more. So if you want to learn more, you can visit our website, www.freedomsringusa.org/Hard Work of Freedom Tour. The second thing coming up is we have our chapter opening up at Quantico in Virginia. So if you know anybody who's in the Quantico area who might want to join us as we go out and volunteer in the community, coming in June, we will have a Quantico chapter getting established and forming and doing great things in that local community. And again, the whole purpose of our chapter sessions is to really connect to our what is often temporary duty stations. So we get to know local people, get to connect with veterans who live in the area, who have retired there, that have helped, that are willing to help us get more rooted in our communities so that temporary duty stations aren't just places that we have no connection to, but that we can dive deeper into and feel more at home at these different duty stations. As always, there are virtual opportunities. So if there is no chapter near you or the Hard Work of Freedom tour isn't going through your town, please still get involved with us virtually. All it takes is to sign up on our website. It's free. You can go to freedomsringusa.org and sign up and become a friend. Join us in our Facebook group, and then also just volunteer and use the hashtag Extraordinary Acts for Others, and we will celebrate the good work that you're doing in your communities, because we are working on growing, but we haven't reached every place yet, obviously. So we want to invite you to join us virtually and to get involved in your community through service. So with that, we want to now get to our conversation about the extraordinary works of Shaunas Sweet Tea. All right, so today's extraordinary guests are Leslie O'Brien and Susan Newell. They're the founders of Shaunas Sweet Tea, which is a new nonprofit that is established to provide awareness of mental well-being and suicide prevention, as well as provide comfort to families of those who had taken their own lives. This came after an experience with suicide of Shauna, who just last year had taken her own life. Mm-hmm. And so why don't you guys introduce yourselves and tell us about Shauna and the start of Shaunas Sweet Tea?
Well, and actually it was a year ago yesterday. Yeah. So this is kind of, I guess, good timing. You want to put it that way.
Fresh.
So Shauna was a Navy vet. She was going to be 26 the month after she died. And it really just came out of the blue. Looking back, I think there was a whole lot of struggle with the military to civilian transition. And I know that's a huge thing in the veteran community. So we kind of like to get into that space as well, but we got to take baby steps. Like you said, we are brand new. But yeah, she just was awesome. I mean, I'm Leslie and I'm her sister, by the way.
And they did not think they were each other were awesome when they were growing up.
Right. Yeah. She was my little sister and a pain in the ass. But anyway, yeah, she was just really awesome. She loved animals. She loved everything and everyone.
She did so many things to cheer other people up. She would get the best gifts for birthdays, for Christmas, for just out of the blue. She was just always trying to make other people happy. And I think some of that was maybe to take away from what she wasn't feeling happy about or to try to replace it. But she was the best. And she was 2 months shy of graduating from veterinary technician school.
Mm-hmm. And that's really where we hit the mental health well-being, is so that people can not get to that stage, not get to that point, realize what's going on before it gets to suicidal thoughts.
When we had to go to San Diego to clean up her room in the house that she shared, there were so many hidden clues that things were a struggle. You know, some in journals, some just the chaos of her bedroom. And when we started talking to friends out there, they would hear one thing, we'd hear another. And when we were all sitting together, we were able to piece together some of those hidden verbal statements that just sounded like Shauna being goofy when you took them individually. But then when you put them together, were definitely cries for help.
And so then you guys decided that it's important to continue a legacy for her and to create something bigger with this. Why is that so important? Why is starting Shaunas Sweet Tea so important to you guys?
The reason behind the nonprofit is to raise money to assist suicide prevention and mental health awareness, and also to fund some of the few and far between programs that go and assist families in the immediate crisis after a family dies by suicide, because there's just not a lot of help in that immediate emotional storm of finding out that a family member has taken their own life. A lot of first responders are not prepared to deal with that aspect as they're investigating the death, and there's just nothing, and you just feel so raw with nowhere to.
And then as far as a legacy, you know, Shauna was just always helping people, so that's really important to continue that, kind of like a pay it forward sort of thing. Yes. But yes, when you kind of go back to the legacy, that's really what it is. It's just helping others and, you know, spreading joy, spreading happiness, spreading kindness, being non-judgmental, because you never know what's going on with somebody else. So that's where we came about with the nonprofit. We just want to reach out to other nonprofits because we know that there's a lot of people who share our mission as well.
So Shauna was a Navy veteran. Do you guys hope to focus in on veteran suicide, or do you guys want to stay broad and talk about mental health, mental well-being for the general population?
I think the two communities that I would like to focus on are veteran military suicide and also youth, because several months after Shauna's passing, I joined an online parents of suicide group and started seeing parents that had lost their children at 11, 12, 13. And it overwhelmed me. My heart broke for every one of those children, for every one of those parents. The children that young feel that hopeless. So I feel like there's something that needs to be done at that targeted group as well.
Once we raise enough funds to where we can partner with other nonprofits that are much more specific, that's really where we'd like to go. And so right now, we are very broad right now. We're just collecting money and really just reaching out to the community to see what they want. On the military side, something that, personally being a military spouse myself, that is very much, I don't know, not under the rug, but not talked about as military spouse mental health. And, because in the veteran community, you've got classes, they talk about it all the time. But military spouses, we're kind of left at home to figure it all out. And that's another tough situation. So that's kind of somewhere else we would like to get to down the line. But like you said, we're new and we're just trying to figure it out as we go, as most businesses do.
With being in that parent group, is there a difference between veteran suicide and general population, or could there be so much more crossover and helping each other?
There could be a lot of crossover. For parents, it's all the same. For families, it's all the same. For different populations, there may be better ways or different ways to reach a person that's struggling, but it's pretty much all the same. You're not going to address a 13-year-old the same way you'd address a 23, 25-year-old veteran. You're not going to approach, how are you feeling today, the same.
Both of which are going to be stubborn.
Teenagers, both of which are going to be stubborn.
And veterans.
And they're both going to deny.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah.
Well, because I noticed it too as a military spouse of how much awareness and classes that they try to bring. And I always kind of wonder if veterans are sort of leading the way in a space that is not paved yet, and that if some of these lessons learned are transferable to a general public.
Yeah, I totally think so.
I think so.
They've got the blueprint. So, because they do, the government's got the resources and the necessity to do it. Meanwhile, nonprofit like ours don't necessarily have that yet. But yeah, I think that's an awesome place to head, because it does exist. You're not reinventing the wheel at that point, but you're taking people who are much more equipped with it and running with it. Because yeah, I do believe that there is some crossover, and the people in that space know what they're doing.
What's something that you've learned about suicide from both the experience and running a nonprofit?
I think probably the biggest thing that I've learned is that people don't want to address the death by suicide. They're there for the initial mourning, but they don't want to talk about your child or your sister that took their own life. Whereas you want to talk about it, because talking about it helps you struggle through your feelings. But except for those that are very, very, very close to you, people don't want to hear those stories.
Yeah, suicide's a big scary word in the general population. And even just saying it, like if I talk to a group of people who aren't ready for it, you can kind of see the cringe and the, oh, did you really just say that? And I think, that's really our main battle, is for society to acknowledge that mental illness is there and be accepting of people who have it and being willing to help in the ways that they can. And if people aren't afraid to say, hey, I need help, hey, I have suicidal thoughts, then they're more likely to get help when it's removed. So that's really our main mission.
You talked there about mental illness, and I'm curious if you guys have figured it out yet, but is there a difference between, say, general mental well-being and mental illness? Is it, am I thinking about it wrong if I think something is like illness being more like a disease and then mental health being I'm in a bad job or I'm in a bad relationship? Or do you know how to bridge those two parts?
Dead on. Now, not being, trained psychologists or anything, we can't like really give you any there's official answers.
Definite chemical imbalance mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar, things like that are defined diseases. But I think also there is not enough awareness of mental well-being, and people get sucked into heavy depression, which is also a chemical imbalance, but it can be more environmentally induced to where people feel worthless and people start feeling the world will be better off without me, or they're overwhelmed by the world. One of the things that Shauna said several times was, I can't adult, which is kind of a humorous, you see it on t-shirts. And that's kind of how I took it. And then I realized when she was gone that she was really saying, I can't adult. I don't have the ability to do what I need to live in the adult world out of the military.
Which kind of means, the wellness part of that was neglected. Because people who can really hone in on wellness, like when you have a cold or when you're, feeling under the weather, you take naps, you drink tea, you take some Tylenol, like you do little things here and there to get yourself back. And I think we don't do that with our minds nearly as much as a society. We don't turn off digitally. We don't, do things that can kind of reset our mind, our soul, if you will. And then it's constant neglect and it builds up. And yeah, I think the wellness comes before the illness, kind of like you mentioned, though, there are certain cases that are extreme that yoga is not going to help. But yes, we do see them as separate.
As you've gone through, can you think of like the biggest breakdown in someone's mental well-being? So I got my master's in positive psychology and mainly an education piece. So like it wasn't to become a psychologist, it was learning it and how to apply it in an education setting. And the things that they talk about, you could talk about like yoga and meditation and mindfulness. You could talk about community and engagement and volunteerism. You could talk about building relationships and coping with stress and building your resiliency. And I guess on my end, I've always kind of thought so they'd say positive psychology is the study of well-being and how to copy it. So you find things that are working out well and how can we duplicate it in society? And it seems to me that the people who get that message are the people who are already feeding into that message. So you're like, yes, I love yoga. It's a good time to zone out and to do this, or I love to run because of this. And you found your wheelhouse already. And so then it feeds into that feedback loop. Do you guys know of any breakdowns in that where somebody finds that break in the dam that it leads from just a bad experience to a chronic problem or a bigger health issue, mental issue?
I don't know. I think in Shauna's case, this sort of, breaking point was the transition into the civilian world. Because she did have bipolar disorder and depression and those things that were under control for the most part. And then she went into the civilian world. You got to do everything by yourself that she had never done before. And most people that go into the military do go in really young. So they don't have a whole lot of time to adult, quote unquote. And so then they go from structure to
free for all.
A free for all, which is fun for a little bit. for me personally, I feel like if I was just thrown into the world like that, it might not work out well either. But, another sort of break in the dam story is actually with me after my first business, the third or fourth deployment that my husband was on. I was by myself. This is the first time that we had moved into a house that I got to do alone with the baby and the business and doing all of these things, lack of sleep, lack of eating good, just a lot of chaos that led to a depression that I was not aware of at the time it was happening. And then I finally was just like, I have to call somebody. I don't know what to do. And I remember just like crying and making this phone call to Military One Click, trying to get through everything. And on the back end of it, I figured it out. Okay, here's what you got to do. You got to eat, you got to exercise, you got to take a break. And then you get into that, wheelhouse, like you were saying, and I haven't gone back since, because now I sense when that's coming. But I think you have to go through it to figure out what works for you and figure out what your breaking point is. And you have to be strong enough to say when to tap out and get help. And that's the biggest issue, is you've got everybody else looking at you like, hey, if you say that you need help or something's wrong, you're weak. So that's kind of the big thing is how much can you stand up to the rest of the world, face the music, I guess.
I think also society has become so fast-paced and so comparing. How do you stand up to other people? How do you look? I think social media has a lot to do with that, particularly for young people. What do you look like to the outside world? And are you good enough? And when people start feeling like they are not good enough, they don't know what to do. So I think somehow organically people need to start spreading better ways of taking care of each other, slowing down and affirming each other's good instead of tearing down each other's bad.
It's interesting that as you shared your story, Leslie, that I remember I was born and raised in Arizona. That's where I met my husband. And it was 10 days after our second child was born. We PCS to Long Island, New York. And that was my first PCS. Born and raised in the community that I went back to after college, and that was home for me. And when that part came out, I was like, I don't know anybody. I don't know anything. And again, like I wouldn't have called it a depression other than maybe if I look back now, I could kind of think about it that way. But I remember when that first winter hit, I was so like, it's dark. I think it was November, and I was already like, it's too cold. I need to get back to sunshine. I need to get
no kidding.
But it was finding your wheelhouse. And how much, I guess, of that do you think is just self-awareness and being able to self-reflect? Is that the skill that people need to build up to say, these are the signs that I know that I have, and as you get better, or as I even get better at it, like I can know, I now know how to kind of prepare for winter and be like, hey, it's going to be dark, it's going to be this, let's have these strategies to keep engaged in the community when everybody's inside. But I guess after hearing you say it, it made me think a lot more is the key to success is self-awareness and just knowing what it is that's going to trigger you, or what is it that you know that you need to back away from or give yourself grace on.
Exactly. And I mean, I say that is most of it, but that's the hardest part, is looking inside of yourself, because you do have to examine the good and the bad. And that's really hard. It's to say, okay, well, I probably shouldn't be doing this and I probably shouldn't be doing that, because you have to tell yourself, these are the bad things and we got to fix them. And fixing bad habits is really hard. Everything about self-reflection, honestly, is hard. Whether you're losing weight, whether you're, trying to, stop procrastinating. There's a lot of things. Like even getting in the habit of putting the dishes in the dishwasher instead of leaving them in the sink. Those are all little tiny things, but those are all things that you really do have to think about and be aware of what you're doing. Tell yourself, okay, let's not do this again. and then continue to do it. So there is a lot of struggle with that. And I think that is step one, is to be able to look at yourself and be non-judgmental. That's the catch, is you can't judge yourself. You can't judge the actions, the procrastination or whatever it is, the fact that you didn't make the bed this morning. You can't judge it. You gotta let it go. And the same with other people, stigma of mental illness. It's the same thing. And I think it's easier to be non-judgmental in that aspect than it is to be non-judgmental towards yourself. And that is something that just comes with time. I don't have a recipe to figure that one out, honestly. But it's slowing down, it's unplugging, it's really taking some time to assess,
To be comfortable by yourself, with yourself, is a big part.
Yeah, which a lot of people aren't. We're glued to our phones. People don't know how to be bored.
Well, and that's a really important thought to chew on as we wrap up this first episode with Leslie and Susan. We can strengthen our own mental and emotional health by just taking time to unplug and getting to know ourselves a little better, because that's when we can learn about what our trigger points are and how best we can cope with them. I know for me personally, I can see it when things start to irritate me and when I get short with my kids. And I also know that one of my best coping mechanisms is to go outside and take a walk. So I now need to know how to do that when it's cold outside or when it's raining outside. What can I do to cope with that? And so learning about yourself and knowing what eases you and what takes away that stress is very important. So if you want to learn more about Shaunas Sweet Tea and the mission that Leslie and Susan are on, building Shauna's memory, visit shaunasweettea.org. So now it's time to share some of the spirited stories of extraordinary acts for others that happen across our country. We are here to celebrate the goodness around us because research shows when we appreciate the goodness, we're more likely to act in goodness. So our first story comes from Oxford, Alabama, where 3 young men were dining out when they noticed an elderly woman eating at the same barbecue restaurant alone. They hated seeing her eat alone, so they went to her table and asked if they could keep her company. It gets extraordinary because Eleanor, the woman, is an 80-year-old widow whose family lives out of town. She thought that this was a godly intervention, and these young men said that they just want to know and show the world that it's all right to be kind. Next, we go to Huntsville, Alabama, where David Green teaches history and raises his 16-month-old daughter. 6 months ago, his daughter was diagnosed with cancer, and his colleagues rallied around together to donate their own personal sick days when he ran out. The Greens were blown away by the response, as they were hoping that he could get just enough time to be with her once a week for her treatment. But he ended up with over 100 days donated to him. Mrs. Green said that this is a huge blessing, and they can't wait until they're in a position to give back and help others. So as you hear in the stories of extraordinary acts for others above, these powerful moments were because of ordinary service with extra love. So we encourage you to do the same. And when you do your own service and volunteer work in your communities, share it with us. Inspire others because of your good works. You can email your story to podcast@freedomsringusa.org. You can direct message their story on any of our social media, or just use the hashtag Extraordinary Acts for Others. So thanks again for listening to this Extraordinary Acts for Others podcast. It's been amazing to see it grow. If you want to do something extraordinary for us, subscribe, rate us, leave us a review, and spread the word. We really do believe that people are extraordinary and that we all have this ability to do something right now and something that's extraordinary for someone else. So we invite you to join us. You can sign up for free at freedomsringusa.org to be a member. So be extraordinary, enter the ring, become a friend, and join our family.